Good morning. The Senate Judiciary Committee will come to order. The first item I wanted to briefly address is committee just wanted to clarify and reopen the hearing on Senate Bill 152 for the sole purpose of I had inadvertently not mentioned that we had written opponent testimony on the bill from the Kansas Trial Lawyers Association and from the Kansas Bar Association. So that testimony was in your committee folder yesterday when we heard Senate Bill 152, so it was just letting everyone know that that was available. So with that, we will then close the hearing on Senate Bill 152 and move on to working a bill that we have previously heard. We have a couple of committee members that might have to leave committee today before we adjourn, depending on how long our work takes. So wanted to make sure that we were able to work a bill that we have previously heard. With that, then, we will work Senate Bill 395. And if we could have a bill brief from the reviser, Mr. Thompson.
Madam Chair, if
yes,
I may, while we're
Bowers.
waiting for him to get set up, could I introduce my pages?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Senator Bowers.
Thank you very much. I have 2 pages from Senate District 36. We have Amber from Lynn, Kansas, and Sarah from Concordia. Their first time to the Capitol. Thank you, girls.
Welcome to committee and to the Capitol. Thank you for joining us today. With that, committee, then, is there? We're going to hear the bill brief from the reviser, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Senate Bill 395 is the bill you heard on February 1st. It is the bill that imposes restrictions on access to private property and surveillance by employees of the Department of Wildlife and Parks. So I mentioned in the brief that current law in Chapter 32 requires the Secretary of Wildlife and Parks to employ conservation officers and others who exercise law enforcement authority. The bill would have a new section of law that prohibits those employees with law enforcement authority from conducting surveillance on private property unless they're authorized by a warrant, the Constitution of the United States, or one of the exceptions to the warrant requirement listed in the bill. And the term surveillance is defined there as physical or electronic presence on private property, including but not limited to a tracking device that's also defined in our criminal code. So that's the scope of the bill.
Thank you. Committee questions for the reviser. Seeing none, discussion or any amendments? After committee met and heard this bill, I had asked the various stakeholders to get together and work on any amendments that they might want to propose, and we are waiting on one to be prepared and brought up to committee, so it is in written format, and a balloon amendment. So with that, we will suspend working on the bill and be notified when the balloon amendment is ready and open the hearing on Senate Bill 483, increasing criminal penalties for theft and criminal damage to property involving remote service units such as automated cash dispensing machines and automated teller machines. We will ask for a bill brief from the reviser, Mr. Thompson.
All right, thank you again, Madam Chair. I'll come up here since this is a new hearing instead of just working a bill. So Senate Bill 483, hopefully you also have the written materials. This increases the criminal penalties for two crimes, theft and criminal damage to property, that involve remote service units. That's a term from the banking code that includes things such as automated cash dispensing machines and automated teller machines, or ATMs, as we all know them. So Section 1 is an amendment to the theft statute. That's KSA 21-5801. You'll note that in current law, in subsection C, which begins on page 2 of the bill, we have some special provisions governing theft of scrap metal. And that provision in subsection C that defines value as the value of the property when it's regulated scrap metal as either the overall value or the cost to restore the site of the theft to its condition at the time immediately prior to the theft of that scrap metal, whichever is greater. So normally value is just the value, but in this case of scrap metal, it's also, if it's higher, it can be the value of the cost to restore the site to the condition it was before the theft. Similarly, in this bill, we would add a provision like that for theft when the property is a remote service unit, or an ATM, as we were just talking about, or a similar sort of unit. So that would increase the penalties, obviously, because theft is based on value, right? So the more value the property has, the higher your criminal penalty. That's how the theft penalties are set up. Section 2 then amends KSA 21-5813. That's the crime of criminal damage to property. I note that current law in subsection B, which is near the bottom of page 2, makes the crime of aggravated criminal damage to property in regard to theft in an amount, or damage, in an amount of damage over $5,000 committed upon certain buildings or structures with the intent to obtain any regulated scrap metal. You may recall the legislature enacting this a few years ago. The bill would add a similar provision to that same subsection so that when the value or amount of damage exceeds $5,000 and it's committed upon a remote service unit, again, that's an ATM type unit, with the intent to obtain currency, you then have aggravated criminal damage to property. And so instead of looking at a severity level 9 or 7 under that penalty provision, you're looking at a severity level 6 non-person felony for aggravated criminal damage. So in both cases, you get increased penalties when the theft you commit involves one of these units and you meet the requisite intent requirements and all of that. So hopefully that explains the provisions and policy question you're presented with, and I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions for the revisor? Seeing none then, we will have our first proponent, in-person conferee, Stephanie Mulholland, Director, Legislative and Political Affairs, Heartland Credit Union Association. Come to the podium. Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. I am Stephanie Mulholland with Heartland Credit Union Association. We represent the 74 credit unions headquartered in the state and the 676,000 Kansans who use a credit union. I also want to note I have a couple of guests with me today from Invista Credit Union, including their loss prevention director who deals with these sorts of crimes every day. Credit unions are not-for-profit co-ops. We appreciate the opportunity to join the Kansas Bankers Association, who took the lead in bringing this bill with us. We see this as part of a solution to address what is an increasing crime for many financial institutions. Insurance company estimates show that these ATM, they're called smash and grabs, increased by 220% from 2019 to 2020, and then again by 257% in 2021. We're certainly seeing that impact here in our state. We think that's for a couple of reasons. There are a couple market reasons that I think that's happening. One is consumers like the convenience of ATMs, so you see more ATMs available around the state. The second reason is COVID led more people to choose to do business through an ATM more often than they might normally do, so those ATMs are readily stocked with cash, making them a bigger target. But the third reason we think there's potential to help address here at the state level through this bill, which is increasing the penalties to make some of these criminals think twice. We do believe this is an organized effort. We typically see a pattern with these crimes. They come into town, steal a truck or a tractor, attach a chain to the ATM and either rip it from its base and take it with them, or they attempt to rip that front door open and open the safe to get the cash. In my testimony, I included a picture just to give you a feel for what level of damage that does to the machine if it's left behind and not completely taken. And then I had a little quote from one of our credit unions in Emporia who had this happen, who, based on turnpike cameras, show that the criminals were in and out of town in less than 10 minutes, came off the turnpike, stole a truck, ripped the ATM apart, and left town. They were at the ATM itself for not much more than a minute. So they happen fast, they're trained, they know what they're doing. Besides the obvious financial cost of replacing these machines, there's a consumer access issue involved as well. It's more than convenience in lower income communities. If that's an ATM that's closest to them that they rely on, supply chain issues have caused several months of delay in getting these machines repaired or replaced. And so for some families, being able to afford the transportation to the next closest ATM or closest branch is difficult. So we do see an access issue there as well. And then I think ultimately it's Kansans that are paying the price, because if insurance premiums go up, then we have to absorb those costs somehow, which means less money back in their pockets. And then finally, I'll close with just saying, I think one of our concerns is, as we look at other states passing similar laws, we don't want to see Kansas become more vulnerable or more of a target by these criminals if we have lower penalties than some of our neighbors do. I know that right now Missouri and Illinois are both looking at increasing their penalties. Texas did it about a year ago because of this same problem. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. We'll reserve questions till after we've heard from all our conferees. We will then invite Ms. Kelly Van Zwal, Assistant VP Government Relations, Kansas Bankers Association. Welcome back to committee. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Kelly Van Zwal, AVP Government Relations at the KBA. Since this is our first time in front of you guys this session, I'll just do a quick reminder on what we are at the Kansas Bankers. We were organized in 1887, and our membership includes 99% of the 220 banks headquartered in Kansas. We also include the 20 out-of-state commercial banks that are operating in Kansas and all those communities we serve. We are here today, as Stephanie touched on. There's been a sweep across the United States in ATM theft and destruction. Over the past year, we began to receive increasing communications from our members that these attacks are happening here in Kansas. These smash and grab attacks, like Stephanie said, usually are organized crime units. And I've included some pictures attached to the back of my ATM showing they take a stolen truck and a hook and hook it onto the ATM and rip it out of the ground. The first picture actually even has the truck there because the police showed up right as it was happening. These attacks are organized crime, and they're quick, sometimes lasting only minutes. In a survey we sent out to our members a couple of weeks ago, we received results back that were worse than we had anticipated. Our participating banks reported that even just one attack can cause great loss, not only in damages, but in the services they're able to give to their community. For a little perspective here, ATMs can cost anything from $30,000 to $80,000 per machine. And then an interactive teller machine, or an ITM, is even more expensive, up to $100,000. Those machines have more developed software and can take deposits and do other transactions. So due to supply chain issues, it's taking weeks or even months to get the replacements or a whole new machine necessary for these attacks. So along with the loss of the cash and the loss of the machine, our financial institutions are also having the cost of more preventative measures, whether that's increased security cameras or a new cement block around the ATM with steel poles in it to try and prevent them from being ripped out. All of this is adding up. Since 2020, we had more than 35 ATMs in Kansas attacked, leading to over $1.3 million in damages. As Stephanie mentioned, this is leading to higher deductibles and premiums. While we do have insurance, it doesn't cover it all, and these premiums are going up. We have one community bank in southeastern Kansas that's been attacked multiple times, and their premiums went up almost $30,000. They're now forced with the decision of factoring in if they can continue to afford having this service. They're the only ATM in the community, so they want it there for their community members, but the cost is becoming almost unimaginable. When it comes to all communities, but especially our smaller communities, the theft and destruction of the ATM limits their access to financial resources. Due to COVID-19 and just the shifting landscape of technology becoming more popular, customers are depending more and more on these ATMs for their transactions. When the machine is damaged or destroyed, it takes weeks or months for the repairs. These smaller communities with a limited number of financial institutions are the most impacted. The bottom line here is that ATM crimes limit their access to financial institutions. This is not just a crime against banks, it's a crime against the communities. When these organized criminals are caught, right now it's being treated as a non-person misdemeanor. Some people ask us why this isn't bank robbery, because really it is. You're taking money from a financial institution. It's our understanding that it does not count as bank robbery because the ATM is not physically located inside of the bank, so it's outside of it. As Jason said, and we really appreciated working with him on this bill, Senate Bill 483 would increase the penalty for both theft of the cash and the criminal destruction of the property to a non-person felony, with that level depending on the range of the cost of the destruction. He also mentioned that we amended the definition of value to include a remote service unit, a term from our banking code that would cover ATMs and ITMs and any kind of similar teller machine. We support Senate Bill 483 because we believe that this increase in penalty fits the crime. We're hoping that this will encourage prosecutors to look at these cases more seriously, and we're also hoping it will act as a deterrent. As Stephanie said, states around us are looking into this same thing, and we don't want to be left behind. Texas has already passed it, and as Texas passed it, we've seen the numbers move up towards us. Oklahoma and then Missouri and Kansas are now seeing more of these attacks since Texas passed their law. Madam Chair, thank you for your time. Thank you, committee members. I'm ready to stand for questions whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Committee, you do have proponent written-only testimony in your committee folder from Sean P. Mitchell, President and CEO, Community Bankers Association of Kansas. And I'll ask, are there any other proponent conferees in the committee meeting room or online? Seeing none, then, committee, any questions for the proponent conferees? I do have one for Ms. Vanswal. Do we know how many persons have been prosecuted for this crime up till now? If you could reintroduce yourself for those following along online.
Hi, Kelly Vanswal, Kansas Bankers Association. I do not have that number. I can look into that and see what I can find, and I can get that to the committee assistant to share with the committee.
Thank you. Do we have any information that because Texas passed a similar law, they're either having a decrease in the amount of this particular crime and an increase in the percentage of those who commit the crime are being prosecuted?
Anecdotally, I do from just reaching out to Texas bankers. I'm sure they have those numbers, and I can get that for the committee as well.
I would think it would cause a decrease in the activity itself and then an increase in the prosecution of those who do engage in this activity.
Yes, hopefully, hopefully it's at least acting as a deterrent, and then, yes, prosecuting those who are caught.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much. Committee, any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you then to our conferees for bringing this very important issue to the committee's attention. And are there any neutral or opponent conferees in the committee meeting room or online? Seeing none, then we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 483. We will turn back now to working Senate Bill 395. Do we have any amendments that are ready? Then we will turn to, we will suspend working on Senate Bill 395 and stand at ease for just a moment. Committee, thank you for your patience, and those in the committee meeting room and following along online. Regarding Senate Bill 395, did ask the parties to get together and work on an amendment that would clarify what the bill does, and we heard some talk about rendering aid by wildlife and parks and things of that nature. So that's what the amendment is going to be looking at, and clarifying that that would be permitted. So I think it's on its way up, so your patience for just a few more moments. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, when we had that hearing, we had asked for some examples of unauthorized access, examples of complaints that had been made of cameras being put on buildings, outbuildings and things like that. Did we ever get any feedback about that, of actual complaints that had been made about our wildlife staff?
Thank you. Ms. Natalie Nelson of Kansas Legislative Research Department, did we get any information back from any of our conferees, or was there any research done to determine if there were complaints of that nature?
Hi, Natalie Nelson, Legislative Research. I did not do any research on that, and I didn't hear from any follow-up from any of the conferees. So.
Okay, thank you. You have further questions?
Well, no, I appreciate it, Madam Chair. I can remember when we've had testimony before on the highway patrol and so forth. You know, they keep track not only of every time that the camera is on, but exactly what happens. And they use that to verify and to determine whether there is any disciplinary action to be taken. So it was just interesting that we had a hearing, but we didn't have any examples of actual complaints. So I just wanted to see if there was a follow-up on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Committee, other discussion before we take a look at the amendment? All right, then we have the balloon amendment being distributed. Thank you, Ms. Nelson, for that. And committee, then we all have the balloon amendment that creates some additional exceptions to grant access to property on behalf of Wildlife and Parks Department, and we'll ask the reviser, Mr. Thompson, to explain.
All right. Thank you again, Madam Chair. So the first piece there, we would add an exception to the beginning of A, except as provided in subsection B. And then you'll note that rather than referencing the warrant requirement under KSA 22-2502 in lines 9 and 10, we would instead just reference a lawfully issued warrant, court order, or subpoena. And then we would add an exception as subsection B that all of subsection A will not apply to activities of a wildlife biologist or biotechnician when their primary purpose is surveillance to track, when the primary purpose of the surveillance is to track wildlife movement or migration, and would also not apply to an employee of the department when the primary purpose of the surveillance is to locate and retrieve a missing person. Then subsection, the definitions would become subsection C, and the definition of surveillance would be changed a little to mean the use or installation of electronic equipment or devices on private property, including but not limited to, I see part of that box is cut off, sorry about the margins there, including but not limited to the use or installation of a tracking device, video camera, or audio recording device to monitor the activity, etc. So the amendment would make the bill read that, with the exceptions, no employee of the department authorized to enforce laws shall conduct surveillance on private property unless authorized pursuant to a lawfully issued warrant, court order, or subpoena the Constitution of the United States or one of the exceptions to the warrant requirement, and then that provision would not apply to those named employees in B1, and it would not apply to any employee of the department when their primary purpose is locating or retrieving a missing person. I think that's basically everything there.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Baumgartner.
This is a question for the reviser. So the use of electronic equipment or devices, including video camera or audio recording, does that include any body cam or cameras that would be on the vehicle?
Mr. Thompson?
Madam Chair, so the definition of surveillance is broad. It covers means the use or installation of electronic equipment or devices. So use would cover the cameras we're referring to there on private property. That would include the use of a video camera on the private property to monitor activity or collect information related to enforcement of the laws. So yes, and then the secondary answer to that yes would be in order to be there and using your body camera, you should be there on the private property pursuant to a lawfully issued warrant, a court order, a subpoena, an exception to the warrant requirement, or some other constitutional reason to be there. So, yes.
Senator Baumgartner, do you have additional questions? Or we'll circle back if you do.
Well, I guess my additional question is, when you drive onto a piece of property, you are essentially, you don't have permission when you drive onto a piece of property. So if you are going to a piece of property and you are going to knock on the door, I mean, one thing we know, I can't speak for the wildlife department. I know our highway patrol, when they stop that car, the car cam has to be on, the body cam has to be on before they leave the vehicle and approach the car. So it seems to me, at any point in time that an officer from the wildlife department, that I would assume that that is their practice. I don't know if they wear body cam. I'm seeing head shaking, but I don't know what that means. But it seems the normal practice would be that that would be turned on. So now we're saying they're supposed to turn it off unless they are actually searching for a missing person or trying to retrieve a missing person or issuing a warrant. Is that what I understand? So is that, I guess I'm wondering if this is changing what is their standard policy.
Well, we don't have a conferee regarding what the standard policy is and whether turning on or off the camera as they drive onto the property to show we have the warrant. So that's something to consider unless Reviser Mr. Thompson has some information.
Madam Chair, Jason Thompson, Revisor's Office, I would just fall back on the Constitution. I mean, that's the reason that the Highway Patrol can stop you and approach your vehicle is because they have probable cause to believe you committed some offense. If they don't have probable cause to believe that you committed offense, they're not supposed to stop you. Similarly, a law enforcement officer from the Department of Wildlife and Parks is not supposed to approach you and be questioning you without some sort of basis, right, under the Constitution or under a warrant or an exception to the search warrant requirement, something like that. So if they are wearing body cameras, in theory, the language in subsection A would allow them to use their body cameras as they're supposed to when they're conducting their lawful activity as allowed by the Constitution. If that's mistaken, obviously we can go correct it, but I think the reason that the constitutional requirement is there is because there are many reasons you could be interacting with law enforcement, and that is lawful and allowed. And this bill is not meant to interfere with that sort of surveillance that might happen.
Thank you. Senator Baumgartner?
Well, I guess I would look at there are times that law enforcement, highway patrol is my example, will approach a car not because a violation has occurred. I've pulled over simply to take a cell phone call. I've pulled over on the side of the highway, and there's nothing that will end a cell phone call quicker than flashing lights and the highway patrol right behind you. But they turn on that camera and they turn on that body cam before they approach the car, what I have learned is from our highway patrol is they never know when they step foot out of the vehicle if that's the last time they're going to step foot out of a vehicle. So when we talk about exigent circumstances, consent searches, the camera would need to be on to approach the individual or to approach the house or the building, even to request permission. So I want to make sure that, I appreciate the privacy rights. I think I am not unlike other individuals on this committee that received email saying, protect our property rights. I have requested examples where cameras have been placed on property by our wildlife folks unbeknownst to the owners, and I have yet to find an example. But what I don't want in an effort to protect the rights and the privacy of individuals, I don't want a new bill, and the interesting thing is this balloon is almost as much as the bill itself. I don't want it to then be in crosshairs with what is the practice of wildlife with regard to their video cams, their audio recordings, or any devices that they have on themselves. So if we can make that distinction, I thought what we were trying to really focus on is they can't come up and put a secret camera on a building or on a post or on a tree on your private property. That's what I thought we were trying to protect from. So I sure would like to hear back from some folks, one, that we're not violating existing policy or procedure for those. I mean, we only have 40-some wildlife officers. I can't imagine that they're doing all kinds of nefarious things in our more than 100 counties. So how do we make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and that we get also that protections for privacy in the process? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, the bill as proposed and with the amendment would not erase or erode or delete the lawful presence of a wildlife and parks officer if there is probable cause to enter the property. Is that right? Or does it impede on probable cause authority to enter onto private property?
Madam Chair, Jason Thompson, Revisor's Office again. I think the reason that the constitutional language is there is because that's the base standard, right? For the law enforcement officer to have a reason to be there, or to even conduct surveillance in addition to just being there. The finer point is, do they have probable cause to be there sometimes, and would that be in conflict with them turning on their body camera and surveilling you when they're not sure they have probable cause to be there because they're there for a welfare check or they're there because of a suspicious circumstance, as the senator was raising. So I'm just kind of at an impasse where, the language says the use or installation. If you just want installation, that's one thing. If you want use or installation, as this proposes, it might implicate body cameras because they are obviously a video camera and you're obviously using it. So it's squarely under the definition just from the plain language. But if you don't want them to be, we can try to carve them out. But yeah, I think you've identified kind of some policy choices and some wording choices that were made and whether you're comfortable with them or not. I think you can pretty clearly be okay if you have probable cause. I think you're okay. Wildlife and Parks may disagree with my statement on that. I think maybe they had some issues with it, but I think that's what subsection A is supposed to say. If you have probable cause or some other protectable constitutional grounds to be there, you can be there and you can do surveillance, and that's what subsection A is still trying to preserve.
Senator Gossage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we know who brought us this amendment?
The amendment was brought to us we had 3 proponent conferees, Kansas Livestock Association, Kansas Farm Bureau Association, and Americans for Prosperity. We also had an opponent conferee, wildlife and parks. And at my request, I had asked those parties to get together, come up with language for an amendment that would bring wildlife and parks to neutral on the bill. It's my understanding that that's what this language is and that that's where this came from.
Okay.
And I mean not neutral on the bill, but neutral on this particular amendment, that they would be neutral on this amendment.
But not neutral on the bill.
Correct.
Okay.
If I-
I have a quick question, and that is then, if this is a collaboration that they brought to us, a wildlife biologist or biotechnician, when the primary purpose of the surveillance is to track wildlife movement or migration. As a property owner that lives in the country, I would like to know that that is being done. I'm trying to understand why that was put in there. I would like to know that somebody is doing that. I think an easy, hey, just want you to know we're tracking wildlife. But, I guess I don't have a major issue if they've come together and the two of them just feel good about this. Is there anybody that is a conferee that could come and speak to this?
He's shaking his head no.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, regarding provisions in law and wildlife biologists or a biotechnician, do we have provisions in law that would prohibit currently this type of activity? My question is, the amendment doesn't permit activity that is now currently restricted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Thompson again. I do not know the wildlife and parks law well enough to be sure, but my understanding was that these practices are happening now and are allowed, and the department was concerned that the language in subsection A would prohibit that conduct. I think that was their testimony the other day. This is one example of the things they thought might be prohibited that maybe you didn't intend to prohibit. So this would be an exception to allow them to continue doing what they're already doing.
What was already the practice of the department. Thank you. Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know that people don't always recognize me when I have my mask on. I'm seeing someone that's here shaking their head that they're not in agreement. But I simply want to ask the question, can we change the language from use or installation to installation and use? That means we're taking something external, an external recording device, either for audio or video or both, and we're saying that you can't install and use without permission. I think that gets us away from the issue of the body cam, a vehicle cam, or a recording device when they're going about their work, which I would think that we would want them to do. That's my 2 cents worth. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Committee thoughts on, we're not really doing a substitute amendment right now, but thoughts on the suggestion offered by Senator Baumgardner? Okay, none. So. And we're not, there's no motion regarding an amendment or substitute amendment. We're just kind of discussing right now. I think the proposal, if I have it correct, committee, is that on the right side, the second to last balloon, where it says the use or installation of electronic equipment or devices, the proposed language would be the installation and use of electronic equipment or devices. And in line, that would be on line 17. Oh, and there's a second one that's not in a balloon on line 17. Instead of the use or installation, on line 17, it would be the installation and use of. Essentially, what we're trying to do here is strike a balance between wildlife and parks' ability to do the work they need to do and protect the Constitution and private property owners' Fourth Amendment right in that regard. So that's what we're looking at here. Yes, Senator Wilborn.
Madam Chair, if I may, it appears to me that the body here is somewhat confused in some of these issues, and I think we need to get them resolved before we move forward. Is my suggestion.
Thank you. We're working the bill, we're not hearing the bill. We don't usually hear from conferees when we're working a bill, but if it would help illuminate and provide some clarity, we can invite, if we have a proponent and an opponent conferee present, we can hear briefly from each. So with that, then, yes, Senator Baumgardner.
I think that also Senator Pyle had his hand up to say something.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Senator Pyle.
No, that was all right. I just think that if you're going to have proponents and opponents, you need to make sure all of them are here and they all need to testify. I'd like to know who drafted this. I mean, I know who drafted it for us, but I'd like to know who requested it. The specific entity, I think in transparency, for that purpose, we need to know. But I'd like to hear from the KLA and the Farm Bureau and AFP, as well as from the department on this amendment. And I think you could just have hearings on this amendment alone. But I think, Madam Chair, the purpose of the bill is to help stop government overreach. This amendment just turns that clock backwards. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Committee, you heard from me that after we heard the bill last week, I specifically reached out to each of the 4 conferees and asked that they work together to bring forward an amendment that would be agreeable to all conferees. This was the language that was represented to me, was the result of those conversations. So that's where it comes from, and as it was represented to me. So let's stand at ease for just a moment. Committee, thank you for your patience and those following along online today. Committee, thank you again for staying at ease, and those in the committee meeting room and following along online. As often happens when there's multiple parties involved and multiple discussions, and all parties involved were informed that it was the intent of the chair to work this bill on Tuesday. Today is that day. So we have been brought this amendment, and there are certain representations about it by I would say the four parties involved, the four conferees that we heard in-person testimony from. And so I am going to then not state that it is agreed upon language by the four parties that came and testified. So this was a proposal. It's by at least one of the four parties. There was discussion about it, and it's unclear the level of agreement. So as we work this, it was my understanding that this was primarily proposed by Wildlife and Parks, is the understanding that I have. And with that information, then I would entertain a motion on the amendment. We can work this amendment, and then if we have a different amendment, as we heard some language by Senator Baumgartner, we could proceed that way, but want to be aware of the will of the committee here. And with that, it looks like Senator Baumgartner has a comment or question.
Well, we do not have a motion on this amendment. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Well, my motion would simply be we move this amendment and we make those two changes on lines 16 and 17 where it says installation and use in those two places, rather than saying use or installation, but it simply says installation and use.
That would be a conceptual amendment. Is that something that the reviser is comfortable proceeding forward on? And the reviser has indicated that that would be acceptable, and it's not a long conceptual amendment, so it's easily understood. With that, then do we have a motion? Senator Baumgartner.
That was my motion, yes.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Do we have a second on the motion? Yes. Senator Gossage.
Just for clarification, so the amendment by Senator Baumgartner would be on this entire bill, or an amendment, on the entire amendment, and then we would vote on the amendment itself? I'm trying to understand if we're voting on the amendment with this added.
Thank you for asking for clarification. We do not yet have a second on the motion. The motion that's looking for a second is the additional exceptions, balloon amendments that you have in front of you, changed in the second to last balloon on the right to say the installation and use of electronic equipment or devices, and in line 17 to change the use or installation to the installation and use.
So then that would be the second, or is the second on the entire balloon? The entire thing with those two changes?
Yes.
Okay.
I would second
that.
There's a second for the motion, the entire balloon amendment with the 2 changes proposed by Senator Baumgartner. That is the motion. Committee, discussion on the motion. Yes, Senator Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this goes back to what others have referenced. I am uncertain as to what effect, if this amendment, as amended, were adopted, it would have on the underlying positions that have been brought by the 2. It has been represented that this is compromise language by both parties or both sides of the issue. And I'm just not certain if that indeed is what is the case. And I'm uncomfortable with the clear understanding I already have of where we are with the underlying bill as to how this will be affected or disaffected. And that having been said, I'd prefer to have heard, even though I know we're working it today and this is not the appropriate time, as to what effect it would be on the parties that are here. And so that's the only reason I'm not supportive of the amendment.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes, Senator Baumgartner.
Yes, in reference to the statement just made, it's become abundantly clear there is no compromise language. It was shared by the chair that this was language predominantly brought by the Wildlife Department, and yet they're over there shaking their head no. So I understand that there is no agreement. I have no idea where this language came from. I'm simply looking at it from the standpoint, the original issue that was brought to us is people are trespassing on our land without permission. We believe it's the wildlife folks. And there's the issue of putting up surveillance devices that are video recording and audio recording. So when I looked at the balloon language presented to us, which is all we can do, this was presented to us, my concern then became, how do you protect individual property rights from any type of overreach, and yet how do you maintain the safety and what would be normal procedure if you're wearing a body cam or have a camera on the vehicle, which is an official vehicle. And I feel this language change assures they can continue with the body cam, and they should have it on when they leave their vehicle. They can have the camera on their vehicle while they're doing whatever work it might be it an exigent circumstance, to deliver a warrant, whatever it might be, or even to let the property owner know, I think there's a problem, do I have permission to check out the problem? At which time they're told either yes or no. So again, we don't have an agreement from the parties. It doesn't appear that the Livestock Association or the State Farm Bureau, though the representative from the State Farm Bureau sat in on some of the discussion, but not to the point there was either an agreement or disagreement. So again, we don't know who this came from. I'm just trying to fix what we have before us today, assuring safety and security of an officer, as well as that personal property right of not being surveilled, of not being recorded in any manner without your knowledge. So that's why I made those revisions to the balloons before us, because that's our only choice. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Pyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a substitute motion.
Mr. Reviser, is that in order? Go ahead, Senator.
All right, I'm going to make a substitute motion, and my reason being, the amendment's now public. It's been offered in committee. I'm going to make a substitute motion to pass Senate Bill 395 out unamended in its original form. And that way, it'll go to the floor if it's brought above the calendar. But anyway, if we pass it out, then we can hear from all parties on this amendment. So I'm making the motion to pass out Senate Bill 395 unamended in its original form.
Committee, is there a second? Senator Baumgartner. Committee, discussion on the substitute motion? Senator Haley.
Let me yield if I can. I saw that Senator Corson too had a question, if that's all right, Madam Chair.
Sure, of course, I
Same
didn't
one.
turn that way to look. I'm sorry. Senator Corson.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm just, sort of struggling with, as I think maybe other folks are, figuring out what the various positions are and what impact this amendment would have and how it may shift either folks who were supportive or not supportive. So, I mean, for me, I'm hopeful that there could be a consensus, but it seems like we haven't yet reached that. So I'm leaning toward being a no on this just because I feel like it's easier to be a no until we have more clarity. But it doesn't seem like this is necessarily a time-sensitive piece of legislation. And so I'm wondering if there would be a way to delay voting on this, and that way maybe we could hear and get feedback from, because as the Senator referenced, this amendment is now public, if we could get feedback from proponents and opponents about their feeling about it so we could decide whether we wanted to support it or not based on the folks who maybe have more expertise and or have been really thoughtful about this bill. I would feel better voting one way or the other, knowing more about how the proponents or opponents felt about this amendment and the changes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Committee, generally in committee, we work a bill, we don't stop progress because we're debating an amendment and we proceed forward. So again, the interested parties were informed by the chair that this bill would be worked today, Tuesday, and I'm thinking then that if they had wanted to, they had an opportunity to reach out to committee members. So this was not a surprise to the interested parties that the bill would be worked today, and that the chair had asked that they come to some sort of agreement. And I have represented to the committee the best information I have on how that process went, and have shared that with the committee. That, as Senator Baumgardner had indicated, that there is no agreement on this language. It was proposed, in my understanding, primarily by Wildlife and Parks. That's the best of my understanding. And then we have before us a motion that has been seconded to pass the bill out of committee. So I'm going to pause and stand at ease for a moment, and there's been a lot of discussion today on this, and again, this is how the committee does its work. Thank you, committee, for standing at ease. Senator Gossage, did you have a comment?
I do. After visiting with wildlife, they said they have been working all evening on this, but they had not fully signed off on it. So that's when you said you had it from all the conferees, that's true. However, they did say in listening to Senator Baumgartner's amendment that they would be in agreement with this.
Thank you. Committee, we do have a motion in front of the committee, and that motion is to pass Senate Bill 395 out without amendment. Is there further discussion on that motion? Senator Baumgartner.
Yes, Madam Chair. The question is, would the maker of the original motion be willing to withdraw so that we could go back since we have agreement? I seconded, and I'd be willing to withdraw that.
Thank you. Senator Pyle?
I support the bill as is and would like to see a vote on this motion, so I will not withdraw. Thank you.
So we do have a withdrawal of the motion and a withdrawal of the second, or we don't? I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you said. No, we do not have withdrawal of the motion. So
we voted down.
Yes, Senator Haley.
So, thank you. Just procedurally, so I'm clear, I would like to have a reconsideration of the amendment since we've been given further representation. If the motion is defeated, what happens to the bill? I mean, can we still have a subsequent consideration of the bill itself?
Thank you. Mr. Reviser, are you able to clear up for the committee and those following along if the motion made and seconded that was presented by Senator Pyle, if the motion to pass Senate Bill 395 favorably out of committee is defeated, what is the status of Senate Bill 395? Can we have another motion and continue to work the bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Thompson, Revisor's Office. So procedurally, you had a motion to amend with a second on the floor. The chair allowed a substitute motion to be passed, which she ruled in order. And so if you defeat that motion, you are back on the motion to amend. If you enact this motion, the bill passes out favorably and the bill is off to the floor.
Are there any further questions for the reviser regarding the status of the motion that we are going to vote on? Yes, Senator Gossage.
I'm sorry, I wasn't totally clear on what the advisor said. Could we have a better explanation? Not a better explanation. That's insulting. I just thought I don't think that I heard it well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reviser, can you explain the status of, I'll call it the Pyle motion, if it succeeds or if it fails? What happens to the bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to sound like the Vice President when he's sitting in the chair on the Senate. A yes vote means the bill will pass out favorably and the committee can no longer act on the bill. A no vote.
And it will pass out favorably without amendment.
Without amendment. It will pass out favorably as introduced in the committee with no amendments. A no vote will defeat that motion and put you back on the motion to amend offered by Senator Baumgartner and seconded by Senator Gossage.
Senator Pyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to be, I understand. I'm going to be more than likely the only aye vote on this bill. But it will be clear that I am an aye on the bill, and that's why I'm continuing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Committee, other discussion on the motion? Not seeing any, but we will stand at ease for a minute.
Yeah, his does. I did, just to. But you withdrew the second. Oh, no. That only counts if he withdraws first.
Committee, thank you for standing at ease. Just to bring everyone some clarity, we'll wait for the sidebars to end. Thank you. Committee, we have heard discussion on Senate Bill 395 and the proposed amendment and the proposed substitute amendment, and this then I'm going to state for hopefully clarity on where we stand on the action we are about to vote on, and it is this, that we brought Senate Bill 395 to be worked on today. The chair had informed the proponents and the opponents that when the bill was heard last week, that the bill would be worked today, Tuesday. So here we are at Tuesday, and the balloon amendment, that is additional exceptions that you have in front of you, is language that was talked about between the proponent and the proponents and the opponent, but there was no agreement. So we had a substitute motion from Senator Baumgardner that would change the language on lines basically 16 and 17 to prohibit the installation and use of electronic equipment or devices. We then had a substitute motion by Senator Pyle that would not amend the bill at all and pass the bill out as introduced. So the conferees had last week, the weekend, and yesterday to work together at the request of the chair to get some language that could be agreed upon. It's our understanding that that did not happen. And we now have in front of us a motion by Senator Pyle with a second by Senator Baumgardner to pass the bill out favorably without amendment. Is there any committee member who is not clear on where we stand, or I will ask the reviser, have I misstated anything procedurally or what we are voting on? And he says, I have done an okay job explaining all that. So with that then, committee, you have heard the motion, and the motion is to pass Senate Bill 395 out favorably as introduced. With that then, you all have heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. Okay, division has been called for. So all those in favor, yes, of passing Senate Bill 395 out favorably as introduced, please raise your hand. Seeing 3 hands. All those opposed signify by raising your hand. 5 opposed. The motion fails. We are then back on the bill. We are back on the motion to amend, which is the balloon amendment in front of you. The additional exceptions with the Senator Baumgardner conceptual changes that would change the second to last balloon on the right to say the installation and use of electronic equipment or devices, and on line 17 of the bill, change the use or installation to the use and, the installation and use of. So that same change twice. Yes, Senator Gossage.
I just want to be clear that my no vote on the bill itself did not mean that I'm not in favor of the bill. I'm very much in favor of the bill, but I do think whenever you can have parties that come together, opponents and proponents, to come together on something, and they've clearly stated to us today that they are now in agreement on this, that is the reason why I'm in favor of voting for this amendment to the bill.
Thank you. Committee, other discussion on the motion? Yes, Senator Haley and then Senator Pyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate Senator Gossage's representation that the parties are together on this amendment and that this would clarify for both. But I'm not supporting the amendment, and I trust but verify, I guess. I believe that the parties both have come to the table, but I don't know, and I have not heard, we have not heard that in open court about, or before a hearing, that is indeed the case. I will vote to oppose this amendment, but in the interim, should it be sustained and should this bill move forward as amended, in the interim, before it runs, I will, as I hope we each would, take an opportunity to clarify the positions of both parties on the issue.
Thank you. Senator Pyle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you're amending the whole amendment in with the conceptual changes. So that opens up the fact that if you read the fourth box down, the provisions of subsection A shall not apply to any activities of, 1, a wildlife biologist or a biotechnician when the primary purpose of the surveillance is to track wildlife movement or migration. That's pretty vague, and that really trumps any Fourth Amendment rights that you would have, because a biologist or technician and primary purpose, what's the secondary purpose? We don't know. Very easily, parks could send someone in just stating technician. All they have to do is say our primary purpose is to track and surveil wildlife, but maybe there is a secondary purpose, and we don't address that at all in this amendment. So we're adopting amendment, or proposing to adopt an amendment that is still very vague, very broad in nature, pretty much doesn't suit the purpose of the bill in protecting those rights. So I'm going to oppose the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we pass out Senate Bill 395 as amended favorably for passage.
We have to vote on the amendment first.
I thought the amendment was on there. Okay.
No.
So I move my amendment.
Do we have a second to move the amendment?
She had seconded
Okay, we
it
did.
before.
Okay, we got the second. Very good. Committee, any other discussion on the motion? The motion then that you've heard is to amend Senate Bill 395 with the additional exceptions, balloon amendments that you have in front of you, with the two changes that in the second to last balloon on the right, it read, the installation and use of electronic equipment or devices, and on line 17, the use or installation language be changed to the installation and use. That is the motion before us. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Division has been requested. Committee, all those in favor of the motion signify by raising your hand.
Oh, of the motion?
In favor of the motion. Seeing 5 hands. All those opposed signify by raising your hand. Seeing 3. The motion passes. We are back on the bill. Any motion regarding the bill? Senator Baumgardner.
I'll say it again. I move that we pass out Senate Bill 395 as amended favorably for passage.
Is there a second? Senator Gossage. Committee, any further discussion on the motion? I want to say something briefly about the process and the work of the committee today, which I very much appreciate. And the work of the committee today is our normal procedure. We bring a bill to be worked, and we work it, and there is no contrary testimony when we work a bill. That was when we heard the bill. Any committee members were free to reach out to any proponent or opponent of the bill, as were the conferees available to reach out to committee members as best they could. Again, proponents and opponents were notified that the bill would be worked today, and that was Thursday or Friday last week. So again, on this issue, to give both sides an opportunity to come together and advance this bill, that opportunity was given. So the committee is doing its work today as announced to those proponents and opponents. A lot of us heard a lot of emails over the weekend. I know I sure did, from the public asking about this bill. So we are then ready to vote on the motion. The motion is to pass Senate Bill 395 as amended favorably for passage. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The motion passes. Committee, thank you for your diligent work on this. Thank you to the conferees who have had conversations together about this bill. And with that, then, we are adjourned. Thank you, committee.